The introduction is the beginning of your dissertation. For the reader, it's the first impression of your work. And in most cases, it determines how the reader sees your research in terms of its quality. So you absolutely need to get it right. You need to write a killer introduction. But how do you do that? Well, here are some points. In the structure of your dissertation, the introduction comes first. It's the first part that has real page numbers. After any preliminary material such as acknowledgement, conventions, and a table of contents. And this is the part readers read first because they want to know what the dissertation is about. And while reading it, they may get turned off because the introduction is boring. Or the research it foreshadows seems boring, which is really just to say that the introduction does not fulfill its purpose. And since it is the first impression of your dissertation, it seems like a no-brainer that you need to get it right, which is why it's really surprising how little attention graduate students pay to it. Typically, it's left to the very end, right before the deadline, and it's done in a hurry with one eye on the ticking clock. Perhaps because students feel that they've already written the opus. And that's what counts, right? Well, I hate to sound disappointing, but not really, because the introduction is really one of the most important parts of a dissertation. It explains what your research is about, how it fits the wider field, and what its contributions are. This is all essential information that deserves to be thought out and written properly, because without it, your dissertation will remain disconnected from everything else. It is the introduction that connects your research to the rest of the field. It does not just link it to the current trends in your field, but plugs it into the wider field, articulating its contributions. And these are things you should spell out. You should not expect the reader to deduce them after reading 7 chapters, because nobody's going to read the 7 chapters unless they understand what they're going to find in them. You need to tell them all this from the start. So what should you include in the dissertation? What goes into it? Here's my list of what I think you should include. Number 1 is background. You need to explain the current state of affairs in your field in a way that allows the reader to appreciate the value of your research. This is where you paint the background against which you will be able to explain your own contribution and its significance. This part is also essential because this is where you connect your research with the rest of the field, where you show that your study is not a convoluted discussion of an irrelevant point, but something that is of value for the field. A study that engages in current research trends and has findings that are both relevant and significant. And so this way the reader can see that your study is really cutting edge. Writing this part, you provide the context for your research and set up the scene for explaining the research itself. Point number 2 is the problem. Once you have painted the background, you can proceed to describe the problem which you're going to address. You need to convince the reader that within the current state of the field, see the preceding point, there is a problem that needs to be resolved. Or there is a misconception about something, a basic misunderstanding with serious implications. In a way, you're pointing out the elephant in the room, an issue that has been holding everyone back. By writing this part, you set up the scene for emphasizing your own contribution, which will be either correcting something or offering an entirely different perspective on a problem, either of which will result in a new understanding and hopefully lead to further consequences. Point number 3 is your objective. This is the part where you explain the point of your research, what you're trying to accomplish, and how it will resolve the problem described in the previous point. In a way, this point works together with the previous one where you were setting up the problem, and here you make the claim that you're going to resolve it. And in a sense, the word objectives is really not ideal because your dissertation is not just aiming to resolve a problem, but has actually already done it. You're just presenting it in a certain sequence. Still, this is the part where you explain that by reading your dissertation, the reader will be able to learn about a solution to a specific problem. Point number 4 is methodology. This is the part where you explain the methodology of your research. You can explain the theoretical issues you're engaging with, the ways you deal with your material, how you access your primary sources, how you analyze your data, and what framework you use to interpret the results of your analysis. This is where you can connect to other theoretical frameworks or explain any of your own innovations. And you should also describe the value of these methods for your own research, how they allow you to see something that others could not see before you, how by using a different conceptual framework, you can achieve an entirely new understanding of an issue. Point number 5 is your contribution. This is the part where you explain the significance of your research, not just in itself, but to a specific field, how it contributes to that field. You want to be able to demonstrate that your research is of value to other scholars, that it advances the current state of knowledge. This part only works if you have set up the previous points. You've described the background, talked about a specific problem, and then explained your solution to the problem. You need to be able to convince the reader that she will not be wasting her time if she reads the rest of your dissertation. And this is also the part where you can talk about the potential benefits of your dissertation beyond your field, how your findings may have implications for a number of other fields. And by writing about these, you're opening up your research even more. Point number 6 is structure. It is common to dedicate the last part of the introduction to explaining the structure of the dissertation, going chapter by chapter, explaining what each chapter contains. Perhaps not so much in terms of their content, but how they move the plot forward, how they progressively build up towards the main point. From a pragmatic point of view, the point of this section is to help navigation, to orient the reader by signposting what can be found in each chapter. And although I have been including this section in my own books, I find it less and less appealing to do so. So I'm tempted to say that this part is really optional, and I myself will probably omit it from my future books. Yet at the same time, a summary of each chapter is also useful for the author because it allows to rethink the entire structure of the dissertation, and to do this from a higher perspective as an outline. And while doing this, the author may realize that she needs to change some of the structure of the dissertation. So I would definitely write this part, but then think about it again whether I actually want to include it. Talk to your advisor and see whether she recommends including it. So these are the main points I recommend to include in an introduction. But there are also things that you should not include, because an introduction to a dissertation is fundamentally different from that in other genres of writing. In academia, the introduction should focus on explaining the significance of your research and situating it within your own field, showing how it solves a problem and how it advances the current state of knowledge. So you should not include personal recollections about how you came about to choose this topic or what you originally wanted to work on. If you really want to talk about these things, perhaps you could include them in a preface or in a brief footnote, but ideally you should just omit all of these details. Okay, so these are my points about what to include in an introduction to a dissertation. Hope you find them useful, and let me know your thoughts about writing an introduction. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.